Clarity by Dragonson, Chapter 2, Eyes of Part 2. You think this is schoolboy? With his head scraping the tatami mat, said boy didn't respond. Even if he were to stand, the panel of shadowy figures in front of him wouldn't see his face behind the mask. Not that they could tell what he was thinking anyway. Ever since Yami had gotten his claws into him, the boy had been an unaccountable variable. You're not receiving a grade. Life is a pass fail, and you screwed up. His three prostrate teammates could say nothing in his defense. They had to endure his humiliation in silence until enough! The final word on all matters within and without the shady organization, the one they called Kage, who entertained the presence of his advisors, if only to give the air of benevolence, the one he called Gramps when he was younger, too young to remember that he did so now was at the behest of the man, which he didn't understand either, but it wasn't his place to question. Kitsune completed his mission without casualties and collateral damage. You don't consider this collateral damage, Saratobi? Of all people, he had to cross Ospin's territory. Ospin, the great and terrible. We've only now recovered since the last time he. Are you considering that I need a history lesson, Jun? He didn't need to look up to see the blood drain from Jin's face. Kitsune could feel it as if he were taking the insufferable man's life with his own two hands. Kage simply asserted that kind of presence. No, of course you're not. The pungent smell of tobacco wafted over Kitsune's head as the old man exhaled a long, glowing ribbon of smoke. Granted, the timing is not ideal. I had hoped a few more contracts might have been fulfilled before my old friend caught wind. You are correct, Jin, that scrutiny from on high is not something we can afford right now while our position is so tenuous, but we have no choice but to push forward with operations if we are to succeed. At this point, all we can hope is that Osman's caution for his students curtails his curiosity. However, the clack of the pipe as it was emptied into a wooden ashtray made them all jump, or rather, it would have if every single one of them weren't trained to hold perfectly still under the most trying of circumstances. I am quite interested to know how this mission was approved in the first place. It seems to me that someone in logistics must have gotten their wires crossed, as the target seemed to know we were coming, enough at least to flee into the Emerald Forest to seek a beacon's clout. His voice was calm, indistinguishable from that grandfatherly consideration, but the four with their head on the chopping block knew better, that if it were directed at them, the latent pressure could have knocked them out cold. I also cannot fathom it to be a coincidence that this occurred on the same day as their entrance exam, the one day that they host every single year. Scratch that. They would have died right then and there. An unfortunate accident, I'm sure, but it wasn't. And as skilled as he was with a sword, lying was one assassin's skills he yet lacked. I'll look into it, Jin replied in a monotone revealing nothing. Kage-sama. Clearly, with equal deadpan, the shadow leader accepted his lieutenant's flippancy for now. In the meantime, it is perhaps better if Kitsune were to keep a lower profile until we can ascertain what kind of fallout this incident will bring. He will be temporarily demoted and reassigned under his old caretaker, along with the rest of his team. This way, we will not weaken ourselves in the field, but have plausible deniability if there should be a reckoning. With all due respect, Kage-sama, with this new voice, it was entirely possible they meant it, but there was also something else, reserved for him especially. His teammate had called it contempt. Yes, and that was supposed to be a bad thing to feel about another person, but the only one whose opinion mattered in the end was that of Gigi. Is this not being too lenient? I fear that man coddles the boy too much in his training. This probably was what allowed for the mistake in the first place. Behind Kitsune, there was an almost imperceptible growl that reverberated through the straw mats. His teammates didn't appreciate the derision of their handler, but none were to lift a finger. So, which of our other, more experienced assets would you suggest? Kitsune remembered his teacher wondering aloud why the powerful Kage tolerated his so-called counsel. He wanted to ask the same thing, but knew to do so would be just as disrespectful. If I may, perhaps Itachi. He could hear the crooning in her voice, like she had already won a victory. Someone like him would instill discipline into Kitsune, and with his prodigal skills, one can hardly say that the student would receive subpar rehabilitation. There was a minor release of tension from his teammate as Weasel was well liked amongst them, enough to score position of second favorite sensei in a unanimous vote. Technically, it was 3-4 and 1 abstained since he never participated in the activity. Namekuji typically acclaimed his votes, giving them two. In fact, he wondered if the woman had been informed of their unique relationship to the man, and knew that his most vocal of teammates would be cackling in joyous irony later. Very well, Saratobi conceded after a pause to make it seem like he was thinking. Itachi has recently returned from his own mission and should be capable of starting his new task tomorrow. Until then, I believe we are done here. Dismissed. The assassins disappeared without so much as a good job for their efforts, but Kitsune would expect one later in private. For some reason, Gigi always insisted on it, and he couldn't bring himself to mind. Personally, I don't think the boy's sensei is the only one being too lenient on him, Jian huffed, holding his arms at where the four teenagers just recited. I understand his status, Sarutobi, but you treat him like a grandson. He has the potential, but only if it's used correctly. He is a blade, an inhuman weapon. The conditioning Yami put him through was the reason why I went through such efforts to ruin him from his care, the Kage interrupted. Not soon enough, apparently. At the moment, he is a liability. If it were up to me, he wouldn't set foot outside until he fully understood his responsibilities, duties which would only be hindered by his fostering of mercy. More of the fruity tobacco burned while the small council waited in silence. There were none too few that agreed with Jin, but far few that would dare say what he had just said. But if I were you, Jin, I would leave the boy's lesson to his teachers. Calm and with his eyes closed until then, the old Kage suddenly came alive and looked at his lieutenant with brown eyes that had the strength to move mountains and patience to rearrange the world to his liking. And the next time you deign to lecture me about my decisions, I would be more than happy to introduce you to my teachers. Understand? The portraits of all the former Kage seemed to glare out at Jin in support of their living representative, and the venerable assassin very nearly joined them in the afterlife right then and there. Yes, sir, of course. That's it, I need a drink, the pink haired woman declared as she stormed down the hallway, quitting the stealth and silence that they had been forced to maintain inside the council's chambers. She was on a beeline to the communal mess hall ASAP, regardless of her teammates trailing behind her or any innocent bystander that happened to get in her way. Sakura, we've been over this, their childhood friend massaged his temple. Headache not solely from having worn his mask for over 24 hours. You can't drink. Watch me. Taking it as a dare, Sakura elbowed her way into the line and snagged a cold one from the bottom of an ice chest. But before she could sadly up to the register or even pop the cap, the sweaty glass bottle was plucked from her grip. Hey! I believe what Sasuke was trying to say is that while you can physically drink, it would be against the rules for on duty personnel. Smiling brightly, the pale faced teen passed the illicit beverage down the line to Sasuke without turning away from the fuming Sakura, or rarely without ever so much as blinking. It was always kind of creepy how his face really was no different than the Muse mask he wore. I'm sure Naruto would not appreciate you getting us into more trouble than we already are. Behind the social inept boy, Sasuke hissed, and in front of Sakura, bit her lip as both real that would have been thoughtlessly said. Oh dear, I think I said something wrong, haven't I? They all glanced back to see their captain with an empty tray in his hands and an equally blank look on his face. If anything, he was staring at the beer and contemplating the age-old dilemma of old enough to kill versus professional discipline. Collectively, they breathed a sigh of relief, but at the tail end, it became one of exasperation, even at his very public lambasting. The blonde killer divulged nothing of his inner thoughts, leading them to wonder at times if he ever had them. Nah, Captain. Hmm? Naruto looked up from his tray, perceiving the slip up as much as he had the gruel, which made its way onto his plate. What is it, Nabijikui? Sakura flinched at the name, having disassociated with it with herself and leaving it behind with her slug mask. Are you alright? Yes. There was no hesitation. Only after this, as Naruto paused and noticed the thin kanji with the Nebashi in front of him for the first time. Perhaps I need something to eat. That's hardly looks like enough, Sakura remarked, drowning his pasta with tomato sauce. Indeed, if I may, Taicho, we did not have proper sustenance for the last 24 hours, Sai related clinically. You need to recover the energy expenditure. Might I recommend something more calorie intensive? Today seems to be Mysterilian themed. They have pork cutlets and ramen. Well, if I can't have booze, Mama's gonna go for some ice cream. No! Everyone once again froze, colder than the door to the freezer, which was cracked open, and by now the others behind them in line were becoming irritated with their continued delay. But like in the council chambers, there were plenty of opinions and not many voices. I'm fine. Naruto eventually relaxed enough to bite out, though his metal tray would have to be retired from service. You may do what you like, which didn't mean that they had to follow their humorless captain once they all served themselves and balanced out at the register. But they did anyway and followed him to a table because they were still a team. He was their captain, sure, and that meant that they should support him. but he was also just like them, a 16-year-old trained assassin, but one who'd had a harsher past than even what was considered the norm for their exclusive lot. In other words, he was their friend. I'm sorry. After several minutes of near silence, the three nearly choked at this sudden declaration from their leader. Normally, the only noise he made during eating was the quiet sound of mastication or the occasional barking of an odor at Sakura, who tried to incite some kind of emotional response. That's alright, some people just don't like ice cream. Are you lactose intolerant? They never mentioned it in your medical records. I believe, Sakura, that our captain was referring to the mission. I know, Sai. Then why did you talk about ice cream? The medic glared over her strawberry sundae at the boy who resembled a blank slate in very nearly every way. Why do you feel the need to apologize? Breaking from his own silent reverence of his meal, Sasuke got them back on track. You completed the mission. There was nothing else you could have done. I could have killed her. No one needed a clarification as to whom their commander meant. It had all been there in meticulous detail in his report, which was used as evidence against him. What they could really use subtitles for was the pensive way he stared at the bottom of his bowl, looking at the dried anchovies as if they might once again swell and swim away into the thin white broth. The assassins didn't kill bystanders, no matter how much it inconvenienced them in a mission such as this. No matter how thankless the effort turned out to be, it was something that had to be done for their own peace of mind and for the integrity of their organization. It was what separated them from common crooks, bandits, grim. I should have killed her. He whispered his sacrilege to himself as he scooped up one of the tiny silverfish with his spoon and contemplated its hollowed out eyes. Naruto would never forget those eyes, dull as a tarnished silver coin, which was traded for his humanity, anger, defiance, grief, and all those things that he would never understand. So why didn't he kill me? Huh? Re-entering the room in time to catch this snippet, Whis wasn't sure what to make of it, nor was she really sure what to make of the expression on the red-themed girl who was staring out the window with a focus normally reserved for combat or schoolwork. I need to be asleep, we scolded. Seriously, where were the other two when she needed them? This child. I was right there when it happened. Weiss paused at the younger girl's statement, trying to link it to some logic. What had they last talked about? I saw the blade cut his throat, Ruby continued, as if Weiss weren't even there. I saw this panic before he bled out. In the background, Weiss felt her breath hitch. She hadn't known that when forming her prior opinions. And when I caught up to him, I asked him why. Did they say anything? Weiss whispered, finding herself ensnared by the promise of reason at long last. A dissection of these monsters who to her were even more inhuman than Faunus. He just said he was the target, Ruby answered, and when I asked him if he realized what he had done, the newly minted captain felt her own words get caught in her throat. What? Whis asked, suddenly impatient. What did he say? He said he had killed him, Ruby answered, knowing that she had pressed on. And I think I would have taken it better if there was some regret or anger or even cruelty to it, but Ruby could feel he resolve wavering again. Could feel her resolve wavering again. This burden was so heavy that she might collapse underneath its weight. What, Ruby? What is it? He felt nothing, Ruby hissed, hands ready to tear at her red-topped locks. No sadness, no shame for taking another life, no twisted happiness for completing his mission. Nothing. The younger girl cried as suddenly everything was shaken free. He should have felt something. Absently glancing downwards, we suddenly lost her enthusiasm for the knowledge as the girl in front of her poured it all out. She had been consumed by the mystery of these assassins for so long that she never dared to think that they were so plain as that man had been nearly a decade ago. Again, where, where were the other two? Again, where were the other two? She had no idea how to comfort the distraught girl. She had no idea how to console herself. I don't even think he knew the man's name, she said hollowly. At last purged of almost everything, neither of them would ever forget yesterday. She would never forget the man she had tried to help, who died in front of her. She would never forget the answer his murderer had given her as to why he had killed him. He would never forget the girl who had pursued him to answer for his crimes. He would never forget the defiance she showed at his answer to her questions. But above all, neither would forget those eyes that were as silver as the illumined moon. He will never forget how they held so much. Those eyes that were as blue as infinite sky. She would never forget how empty they were. End of chapter 2.